Thank you, Grace. I wanted to express my sincere thanks for having Grace invite me to come and talk about some of the things that I think are near and dear to my heart, and hopefully at some point in time will become near and dear to your heart. And the thrust of it is, what kind of a retirement are you looking at as current college students? But I want to raise something that I think is of critical import as you think about this subject going forward, because it has some very significant individual ramifications as well as social ramifications. And the first question I would ask is, how many gated communities can we build in this country surrounded by moats of money, protected by a twisted political system before those on the outside want in? We call that revolution. When I was a student here at Seton Hall, like yourselves, sitting in class, I never really gave any thought to the notion of retirement. No one at this level gives any thought to that. It is a profound issue that will have a significant effect on your ability and your quality of life going decades down the road. Might not seem that important today because your primary concern is how you're going to do on the grades this semester and what are you going to be doing next semester, et cetera, et cetera. But a catalytic event took place in 1978 when the leadership in major corporations decided that they needed yet another way to protect and preserve money, their income, and create another retirement system. So they beseeched, through their lobbyists, Washington, D.C., to enable them to come up with a creative way to do this. And in fact, what was created was the 401k plan, the defined contribution plan. Now, Congress, in its infinite wisdom, said that, well, perhaps we can do this, but we've got to give it to everybody else. So the entire land, everyone was, in the private sector, was entitled to a 401k plan or a defined contribution plan if their employer chose to set it up. So, 1980-81, about 60% of people, employees in the private sector, were covered by what was commonly referred to then as defined benefit plans. Namely, that would provide a plan that would provide over X number of years, people working at a job for 15, 20, 30, or 40 years with a monthly annuity predicated on an actuarial formula that determined how much money they would get based on their salary. And they would have that benefit for the balance of their days. It's a pretty good program. Many folks retired in that kind of luxury, if you will, and on top of their Social Security, lived a fairly decent life in their retirement. But what happened was the leadership of major corporations began to think about, why are we offering this as an adjunct to a defined benefit plan? Let's do away with the defined benefit plan and create the defined contribution plan as a standalone. In my judgment, the most idiotic thought on the planet. Why? With all due respect, the average American doesn't know the difference between a stock and a bond. And to ask an individual to begin to plan their long-term asset allocation when they haven't gone to the Wharton School of Finance and don't understand the nuances of alphas and betas and R-squares and the movements in the markets is absolutely ludicrous. It's criminal, I would submit. So, as time unfolded, we went from 60% covered by DB plans, defined benefit plans, to today maybe about 18% covered by defined benefit plans. And the number of people in the workforce in the private sector covered by defined contribution plans is somewhere in the neighborhood of 80%. Some employers making a matching contribution, others saying, you're on your own. It's called the yo-yo generation. You're on your own. What typically happens when a young person like yourselves goes to work for a corporation, and if they do in fact have the ability to offer you a defined contribution plan, 1 out of 3 accepts it. They say, I need that money to buy a new suit, to pay for my apartment, to go out for pizza and a beer on Friday night. I can't afford to put that money in this account. It also allows loans. Well, it's ludicrous to allow people to take a loan from their pension plan because, number one, they pay a penalty, and on top of that, they pay the taxes. So if you could sit down with a 32-year-old now who's maybe taken out a $10,000 loan because he or she has a sick child at home and they have lousy health care coverage and they needed that money to pay for that surgery or whatever, to ask them, oh, you got to put that money back, and that individual is going to say, well, I had to take it out of there because I didn't have it anywhere. I can't put it back. But you don't understand. That $10,000 over 30 years, compounded at 8%, if you can get it, is $240,000. Maybe the difference between retiring and not. And the 32-year-old says, well, I guess I'll have to worry about that at some point in time. And the third ridiculous argument for these plans was, well, the average youngster coming out of school is going to have 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, maybe as many as a dozen or more jobs or varied kinds of careers as they move through their lives. We want to give them portability. Well, if you look at the statistics, the average young person leaving employer A to go to employer B or to go from B to C, 90% of them don't roll it over to the next employer. It's found money. It's in the bank account. And once it's in the bank account, checks start to get written. Maybe at that point in time they need aluminum siding on the house or upgrade the air conditioning in the house or go to Hawaii or buy the used Harley or whatever. These are legitimate, real, bona fide reasons why people don't think seriously about their long-term retirement goals. It is a frightening prospect. And I will be the first to admit to you that about 3 to 4 years ago, I started to talk at pension and investment conferences about a very horrible notion: elderly people living under bridges. The potential is real. I also started to write a dozen years ago about intergenerational warfare, where youngsters coming up said, I thought that stiff was going to leave and retire, but now that stiff can't leave and retire because he doesn't have a pension or she doesn't have a pension. So they're going to stick around. 41% of 50-year-olds today, in today's world, don't have a nickel saved for retirement. 50 years of age, and they don't have a nickel saved for retirement. That's not a pretty picture. And it will become more and more ugly as time goes on. The message that I would like to convey to you is, whenever possible, even if it's $10 a week, put it away. Don't think about it. And ultimately, if it's in a defined contribution plan provided by an employer, and if there's a match, that's great. If there's not a match, again, you're on your own. But usually they offer to you an opportunity for, some of the big insurance carriers, et cetera, or investment mutual fund organizations and whatnot, to offer you an array of asset allocation. Take advantage of those kinds of things and try to study as much as you possibly can to understand what your exposure to the stock market should be today compared to the bond market, or vice versa. Now, we're in the shadow of a horrendous debacle on Wall Street. Where that ultimately is going to shake out is anybody's guess. I'm not a strong proponent that unemployment is going to drop precipitously over the course of the next couple of years. In fact, I would be very, very surprised if we're still not at around 9.7% unemployment by the end of this year. And maybe, if we're lucky, if the wizards in Washington can get their act together and come up with some kind of a substantive job program, that maybe we'll see 8% unemployment at the end of 2011. But there are jobs that existed that some people worked out for 15, 18, 20 years or more that ain't never coming back. There's a systemic change going on now. The more education that you bring to the table, the more awareness you are of the world around you is going to make you a better candidate for the jobs that will be coming available as time goes on. And new technologies are created, and entrepreneurs put together programs to come up with new creative things to service an economy. This is a very profound subject. I know as young students in college, this is not something that's, on your A list necessarily, but it's something that you have to give serious consideration to, because if you don't, believe it or not, when I was sitting on this campus, I never thought I'd have gray hair. I never thought I was going to get older, but it happens. Life is that way. And as time moves on, you begin to think about what are the kinds of things you want that are going to protect you during your so-called golden years. And there's a lot of folks out there, unfortunately, who are not going to experience their golden years. And there are already tent cities in places like Texas and California and other places around the country. And I suspect that we'll see more and more of that going forward. Thank you very much for your attention.